Thursday. I was going to say Tuesday because that's what it feels like.
We'll wait just a few minutes here and let some viewers get on. If you're watching with us today, tell us hello. Tell us where you're viewing from.
They're starting to come on.
Get a few viewers.
Hi, Tammy.
Hey, Althea.
There we go. Kinsey, Shannon, Angela,
Daryl, Julia. All right.
All righty. We're going to go ahead and get started. We've got a nice little group. So, okay, everyone, due to unforeseen circumstances, Martha was not able to join us today, but we do have a very special guest, Ty Mitchell, with us today. And he has been an instructor at the Josey Ranch for over 30 years, and he's been an instrumental part in the design team for the Josey Mitchell saddle and bit lines.
So be sure if you have any questions for Ty on the bits or anything involving bits, please get those in the comments. He is here to answer all your questions. And at the end of this segment, 2 lucky commenters are going to win the Martha Josey $1 Million bit.
Awesome.
So you are going to want to make sure that you get your questions in here, and now's the perfect time because Ty is here to help. So with that, Ty, we will turn it over to you and we will let you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's good to be with you today. I been excited to answer any questions that you may have. I know they were wanting me to talk some about bits, and bits are such an important part. If you're riding horses or training horses, understanding bits when you go to a tack shop or Western store, it can be overwhelming at times. So many bits look very similar, but today we're going to try to shed a little light on that, explain some of the differences and some of the reasons behind some of the design. But remember this, if there's one tip, a rider is only as good as your hands are. And, you know, I don't care what bit you have on, if your hands are not communicating with your horse, that's a problem. So always be aware of what your hands are doing. Always encourage people to be light with your hands and having the proper bit that is comfortable for your horse, that you get the response that you're looking for. That's what it's all about.
All right. Just to kind of get us started, we have a couple of questions to ask you. Can you talk to us a little bit about the Martha Josey $1 Million bit that we'll be giving away today?
You bet. The $1 Million bit has been one of our most popular bits over the last 35 years. And the reason that it works so good, I've got one right here. And it's called the short shank combination. And what makes it a combination is it's got a nose band as well as a bit. And so you've actually got pressure in 3 places: on the nose, the mouth, and the curb chain. And with it being a gag, you've got your slide right here. That's what's going to give you your bend. The thing that I like about a gag in barrel racing is that you have that opportunity to engage with your horse before it puts too much pressure. Kind of, you can send them a signal, hey, we're fixing to make a right-hand turn or left-hand turn. But with that slide, that's where your bend comes from. The nose band, what makes this bit unique is with the nose band, the bit goes back to a neutral and natural position fairly quick. When you leave a barrel or release the rein, giving the horse's head back to him, I want a bit that's going to be balanced and go back to a neutral position pretty quick. You'll see some horses leave a barrel with their head staying behind them, and some of that can be rider error, but sometimes the horses are overreacting to what the bit's doing. So the $1 million bit is pretty balanced. It's pretty forgiving. If your hands are not just right on your rein, it'll kind of help hold the horse together in a turn. It has rate, it has bend, and it has lift. And those are three important things when you're running barrels.
Okay. We had a question. Can you recommend a bit for someone who's just starting out?
The $1 million, you always want to take into consideration if I've got a 7 or 8 year old child riding a horse versus an adult. A lot of times I'll see people that are a younger kid that is maybe getting a new horse and maybe an adult's been riding it. And so I would rather overbid a kid and have more control than underbid them. When they weigh 50, 60 pounds, that horse does not fill them up there. And so I want them to have control and that horse to know, and they're not strong, so they're not going to damage a horse. And then if I'm heavy handed or an adult, I want a bit that's probably a little more forgiving. I always strive to get better with my hands. The $1 million bit is pretty forgiving because you do have pressure on the nose. It's not all just in the mouth. And until somebody gets a little more experience with their hands, I feel like a combination bit is more forgiving to that horse's mouth, because they're not going to, with that nose band, it's a little more forgiving than being just directly in the mouth. And, we got the $1 million bit. We've got the teardrop combination, which is a little less of a shank, just like the $1 million bit, but it's a little shorter. And so if you have a horse that's lighter, or if you need less bit than that short shank $1 million bit, or the O-ring combination is good as well.
Anna Marie asked, do you have any tips for keeping your hands down?
Well, that's a good question. And, at the clinics, that's one thing that we always work on. Hands are 90% of problems with horses and rider communication. Because once that adrenaline gets to go in, our hands seem to get crazy or can get crazy. And I always like to imagine there's an imaginary box right over the horse's withers, right in front of the saddle. And I want to kind of keep my hands, and to me, it starts in your slow work. You don't learn in a run as much as you do when you're just out riding, knowing where your hands are at are very important. And one thing that, we've done in the past, I remember Josey did this to my wife, is he put some rubber bands on her wrist and just enough to kind of remind her, it won't stop you from getting your hands up, but it'll definitely kind of bump you and it catches you in the act. And it really makes a difference. But low hands, and I don't want them too low. I'll see people riding below the horse's withers, and that's not good either. But right above the withers, I want my hands choked up on the reins enough that, if I'm riding back, my hands are back towards my body, I'm going to be slow and delayed. And I want my reins to where they're, a good rule of thumb too is rein length on barrel racing. I'd like for it to be, and it can vary on different style horses, but a good rule of thumb is you ought to be 2 or 3 inches in front of the saddle horn. You should be able to take the slack out of your reins, and your reins should. And a lot of people will make the mistake. I have heavy hands or high hands, and they'll let the reins out longer, which creates more opportunity to get your hands higher. And so I'll ride with not necessarily a shorter rein, but I don't want to make sure it's not too long, but to where I can keep my hands in front of my body, in front of my saddle, and right over that horse's withers, and minimize my hand movements. My hands should only be about like holding a plate of food, about that much width. I'm just like I'm holding a plate when I'm holding the reins, and I want it right over the horse's withers, and I have more control of their body there.
Okay. Angela asks what you would recommend for a gaited horse.
Well, and we've had several gaited horses. A gaited horse that you're trying to run barrels on. If it's a gaited horse you're trying to run barrels on, we've had several of them come to the clinic. The go-around bit or the $1 million bit Both those bits are real good. It just kind of depends on the horse. Each horse is a little different. But if you're trying to run barrels on them, maybe even that go around with a mullen mouthpiece would be good.
Erica said, I've been using a German martingale. I would like to get out of it. My horse gets too strung out when I take it off. I run barrels. What should I use to get out of it?
Well, that's a good question, and I think a German martingale is a great tool, in the practice pen, and very seldom will I use it in a run because you do get a little too much direct nose, and you can get a horse where they're not as collected when you're going faster. But for slow work, it's definitely good. Getting that head set, head in position is good. But if there's a couple different ways you can go with that. If I've been riding in a martingale, I've obviously been trying to get their head down. A good little bit that I'll ride in is the short shank gag. And you may be riding in something like this. I don't know what you're using with your martingale, but try to get it in the camera here. Short shank gag. It's got a little bit of slide right here. You've got your curb chain. And when you're adjusting, especially on a gag bit, when you're adjusting these bits, you want to get it picked up in the mouth where you've got 1 to 2 wrinkles. I don't want it to where this bit is just floating. If that horse is chewing on the bit and it's floating up and down, you're probably not going to have a lot of response. It's going to be delayed. And so I'll get it to where it's picked up in the mouth. But this would be a good little bit. Even I've been riding in the German martingale, the short stop is another bit. And it's an O-ring, but it has a stop right here. And you hook your head stall up here to the top, reins down here, and you do have a curb chain. And so it kind of rotates. But this probably has a little more collection. Just kind of depends on what you've been riding him in. I'm assuming it's been a lighter bit if you've been riding with a German martingale. And if I need a little more collection, I might even go to something like the teardrop combination, and which has just a little bit of shank right here. But this still will have a little more collection and probably give you the comfort you need making a run on your horse.
Okay. Do you practice in the same bit that you compete in?
Great question. Typically not. And, if I ride in, say, the $1 million bit, anything with a rope over the nose, I typically will get off the nose during the week. And usually there's 2 reasons behind this. Having a practice bit, through repetition, your horse gets to where they know when you have the practice bit on, they're doing slow work. And when they're having competition bit on, they got their game face on. And so through repetition, they understand that. The other reason is, like, if I do ride in $1 million bit or any kind of combination or hackamore, I want to, typically a horse might get to rooting on that if that's all you ride in, or getting their nose up. And so I will go to the short shank gag or like the short stop bit, something that's a little lighter without any nose pressure. And I'm not running in it, so it is less bit, but it should be enough bit for a control. If you're loping circles or trotting through the barrels, it's lighter and it kind of rewards your horse as well.
All right. Carol said, can a tie down be used with the $1 million bit?
A tie down can be used with a $1 million bit. However, I found that if you're using a tie down, I'd recommend a small or narrow strap. I do not care for like a wide leather noseband with a $1 million bit because it can interfere with the curb chain. A lot of these bits are high purchase bits. So when you're getting a tie down, something like a smaller rope or something that is a little more narrow, that's not going to hang down low. And I always want to pull it up to the horse's cheekbone. And that way I've got it above the action of the bit. But yes, you definitely can use a tie down with a $1 million bit.
Okay. Donna says, I just got a quarter horse from a kill pen. How do I figure out which type of bit is the best to use without having to buy tons of bits?
Well, and that's a good question because that happens a lot. And so when you know, when I'm getting a horse from that situation, I'm just going to assume nothing about that horse. I'm going to treat them like a horse that I'm just breaking. And so I'm going to start slow. I'm going to go to, you know, I want to be in a controlled environment such as a round pen, and I may even put the bit on, and I'm going to start with like an O-ring snaffle, something fairly mild, and treat them like I'm, you know, I assume nothing when I get a horse from that situation, and you really don't know the total history about that. And so I'm going to start with an O-ring snaffle, something light, and see and work from there. And like I said, I would do this in a controlled environment, in a round pen or a smaller area, and it doesn't hurt. You know, I've had a couple that we've had in training before that have been in that situation, and I've learned that, you know, don't assume nothing. So I'll start light and then kind of work my way up. Now, at that point, if he has been ridden or has been competed on, that's going to, you know, a good starting bit might be the $1 million bit. Or the, you know, if he doesn't seem like, if he seems a little lighter in the mouth, then I might go with that short shank gag. Just kind of depends, but I would start, hopefully you have an O-ring snaffle and something light. You may not, you know, you may already know more about the horse and he may need more bit than that. But a good starting bit would be the, like the O-ring snaffle. And then from there, an O-ring combination or a short shank. To it, it kind of depends on what stage he's at and how much training he's had.
All right, Pamela said, I have a thoroughbred who came off the track. He has no back teeth. What is the best bit to use for him?
Well, in, you know, any of the race horses that we get and start to put a pattern on, the first thing that I'm wanting to do is get them to where they're submitting to bit pressure. They've been taught to kind of balance or brace on a bit. And so you know, when I'm getting a race horse in, I'm doing lots of circling and getting them to submit to bit pressure. You know, I typically will start with an O-ring, but I'm going to work up to the short shank gag, something like this. And it comes with a curb chain. And a lot of times I'll take the curb off and just put a nylon string. If I'm using it kind of more in a training environment, you can put a string on it instead of the curb chain. But I'll something like this would be good to start, you know, a race horse in. Just kind of depends, but the main thing is get them do lots of circling, getting them to where I don't want to pull on both reins at the same time much when I get them in. I want to be doing more one rein stops and bending and flexing and getting them to submit and give to the pressure of the bit where they've been used to pushing against a bit.
Okay. Emily is asking, what do you recommend for a lead change after the first barrel? I go to the right barrel first.
Well, what bit do you recommend, or what exercise?
That's what she's asking.
What bit?
What she said, what do you recommend for a lead change after
Okay. Well, on a lead change, leaving the first barrel, I will typically overturn my first barrel, or I'll keep them just a smidge longer in that turn to where they almost have to move left as I overturn. I want them to step left, and that'll help or encourage that lead change. And I feel like it's important that they change that lead at that point because it's more natural for them. And then if they run to the second barrel in the left lead, they're less likely to lean or cheat or do anything. But if your horse is not wanting to line up good, I will load multiple circles around that first barrel, get them to where they're expecting to overturn or leave that first barrel, and they're like they're wanting to go to the third barrel. And once you get them to where they're overturning on their own, then I can manipulate them with my left rein and just straighten them up, and they'll jump into that left lead real good. If he is hard to swap leads, period, then there's some exercises that I do off the pattern. But for the pattern, overturning your first barrel is very important.
Okay. We have a question here. If a horse resists the bit you're trying or won't stop or listen when you use your reins, how do you slow them down to accept the bit?
Well, and it kind of depends on knowing the horse's background. If it's a young horse, that's different. They've got to be taught. But we'll get a lot of horses in that are being sent there to be tuned on for this very reason. Sometimes horses will take advantage of people. Sometimes horses, have pain-related problems that initiates that. And so always, anytime that if I have a horse that is being kind of a bully, I want to make sure, number one, that they're sound, that they don't have some underlying issue going on. Number two, I want to make sure I want to do my work in the practice pen. I want to make sure that I always will seek some help if I'm having a horse taking advantage of me. Because, last month or so, I've had 2 or 3 people that have had horses doing what you're describing. And part of it was one of them didn't have the right bit. One of them was timid, and that horse knew that they were timid, and so they just kind of took advantage of them. But if it's a hyper or nervous horse, then I would, probably get them checked out and see. And then once I know my horse is sound and everything's good, and then lots of good old wet saddle blankets, good riding. And a lot of people don't realize that. And I got a taste of it this last week when we had all the snow. When them horses been locked in a stall and you bring them out, they are full of themselves. And we've trained a lot of young horses, and it's a daily thing. And they've got to be rode daily and exercise daily to maintain a good mind and to stay backed off of a bit. I don't know how much you're getting to ride, but some horses, a lot of times people bring horses like that, and to me, they probably hadn't been getting opportunity to ridden enough. And so they're always riding a fresh horse, and they will definitely take advantage of you. But making sure your horse is warmed up properly, it makes a big difference.
Chris asked, what are your thoughts on leather curbs for a young horse?
They're getting, like with my O-ring snaffles and even some of my other bits, I'll have leather curbs. That kind of depends on the stage that I'm at with that particular horse. When I'm starting them off, I definitely don't want anything too overbearing. And then I've had, even older horses that are more sensitive. What I'm looking for is a horse to respect what I'm riding them in, and I want to be as light as possible. So if I can ride in a leather curb and I'm getting the response that I want, that's a good thing. And so I've got a couple of horses that I will ride with a leather curb, and that means they're nice. That's a good thing.
Is there a bit that you recommend as a step-up bit from an O-ring?
Good question. The short stop, it basically is an O-ring, but you have, I'll try to get in the camera here. You have a 3-piece with a copper dog bone, and this is a medium twist. It's not, it's pretty mild mouthpiece, but this will introduce a horse to gag. You've got some slide right here, and you've got where your reins hook up and your headstall hook up. It's going to allow this to rotate and let the curb chain engage. And so if I've got a young horse and I'm wanting to introduce them to some gag and a little bit of curb, this is still fairly mild, but it is a step up from an O-ring. Or I'll go to the short shank combination, the one I showed a while ago. And this has a little more slide, a little more action. Once again, I may take the curb off, put a nylon cord on, and at that point, that cord's mainly there just to hold the bit in place where it doesn't kick forward. What you're wanting to work is the slide of the mouthpiece. And this really helps getting the horse to flex in the pole, and it promotes bend if that's something you're needing.
Okay. If I have a horse that needs more bend, what do you recommend?
Well, there's 2 or 3 bits. The bend is definitely going. If you have anything with a slide or the gag right here, I'm going to use this, something like this. Even an O-ring, Depends on what speed there's some horses, when people say my horse is not bending in a run, it might be a little different. In most horses, though, I try to have them bending good in my slow work. So I'm going to put something like the short Shank Gag, a draw bit, something that's going to focus more on flexion of the pole and getting the horse supple, something that's a little lighter. But I want my horses to me, a horse that is loose and limber, they seem to be more relaxed when you go to make a run. A horse that is stiff and tense, or is stiff, they seem to be more tense. And so I think a lot of that is done through your slow work and how you warm up. And when you're warming a horse up, it's not just about warming the mind, body up, it's about warming the mind up as well. And so that's going back to, having a practice bit versus a competition bit. I've got 2 or 3 bits that I use on a daily basis for what you're talking about. One of them is the little short Shank Gag. Also the reverse gag. This is a 3-piece with a dog, similar mouthpiece, but this has the gag is on the front part, which is a little unique. And what that's going to promote is more flexion of the pole. And this bit feels good. It has a nice feel to it, but it has a little more lift going into a turn.
Janet has just joined us, and she says, I don't know much about bits, which is why I tuned in. Very good. Okay, lots of great information. And she wants to know if you can tell her what the black round flat pieces are on the bit itself.
You bet. That's a good question. That is a bit guard. I'll try to get it on the screen. That is a bit guard. And what that does is it protects the corners of your horse's mouth. Anytime that you have movement right here, you don't want it to pinch. And so I always encourage people to, sometimes these bit guards will come off and they make replacements for them. But they're even good on an O-ring snaffle too. If you're breaking a colt and there's a lot of outside pressure when you're teaching them, sometimes the outside, the corners of the mouth will get cherried up. But that's just mainly there for protection, to keep the action or the movement of the bit away from their pinching them.
Any questions there?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, I think you've answered every question on this list. So do you have anything else to add, Ty, before we draw a few winners?
All right. I like the drawings. Anytime, a couple of things that I hadn't gone over is making sure that you have a head stall that properly fits these bits. Most of these barrel racing bits are a higher purchase. One of the most common things at a clinic, one of the first things we do is an equipment check. And it's inevitable that a lot of the head stalls are too big for their bit. The bits are hanging in the horse's mouth and the bit's not going to function properly. So proper adjustment is very important. A good rule of thumb on your gag bits or the $1 million bit is I want it picked up to where it's at least flush with the mouth, up to 1 to 2 wrinkles. A good rule of thumb on the curb chain is a couple of fingers between the chin and the chain. And that's a rule of thumb. You can always tighten it up if you need more woe, or let it out a little bit if you need more bend. But I'll just leave you with that.
There's another question that came through.
Uh-huh.
We had one more question come in here. Nikki says I have a TB and she used the corkscrew. Do you think I should change it, or would it be better to stick with it?
Well, that would be a hard bit to stick with the whole time. There's times where I'll use that to get a horse backed off, but you definitely need to try to go to something else. For as long-term use, that's probably not a bit that I would want to use. A good bit that might work from that would be this little reverse gag. And it is, if you have a horse that's kind of pushing, or this will help kind of get them to flexing in the pole and backing off some. and it's pretty forgiving. And but I would recommend something like that reverse gag.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
That's all the questions.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Lots of great feedback.
Yes.
Okay, I think that we have 2 winners picked out.
Mhm.
So, 2 lucky commenters are going to win the Martha Josey $1 Million bit.
And the first winner is Carol Strong. So, woo! Congratulations. And the second winner is Pamela Smith. So, congratulations, ladies. And
Ty, we want to thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you coming on live with us and answering all these questions.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
before we hop off here, we want to remind our viewers about our Lucky 7 sweepstakes. This ends the 26th, which I think is Friday.
Tomorrow.
So get entered now. Don't miss it. There's going to be 7 winners. Total packages valued over $800.
And tune in next Tuesday because we will be live again with KVP and we will be talking about the new Kong equine. So you won't want to miss that.
Awesome. We will see everybody next Tuesday.
Thanks again, Ty.
Thank you.
Thank you.